Why God secretly sends dark chosen ones as his elite shadow agents. Let me tell you something that most spiritual teachings avoid: something hidden behind veils of light and love, and something buried beneath the sanitized versions of awakening we're fed by the mainstream. There are some souls who don't come here to spread peace. They don't come to fit into the spiritual template of calm voices, white robes, and incense-filled temples. They come like thunder. They come like storms. They are the ones who walk into the darkest places on earth, not to escape them, but to transform them from within. These are the dark chosen ones. And yes, I'm telling you, God sends them. Secretly, strategically. They are his elite shadow agents, and they don't wear halos. They wear scars. We've been conditioned to believe that divine missions look like charity work, like preaching love and light, like floating above the human mess. But for some of us, the mission is dirtier. It's heavier. It's coded in chaos. We are sent into broken homes, into violent communities, into mental prisons, addiction, spiritual confusion, not because we're cursed, but because we're called to remember who we are inside the fire. That's the first sign you might be one of them. You didn't awaken in a yoga class. You awakened in a breakdown. You awakened in death, divorce, betrayal, or rage. You weren't handed peace. You earned it. You forged it. You bled for it. But here's the twist. No one tells you that you were chosen. There's no ceremony. No angels descend to pin a badge to your chest. Instead, God strips you of everything: your identity, your comfort, your sense of belonging, until the only thing left is the raw, unfiltered you. And in that silence, in that desperation, something ancient activates, or a flicker of memory. A whisper that says, "You're not here to be saved. You're here to infiltrate." And the reason it's a secret, because if the world knew who you were too soon, it would try to corrupt you or kill you. God hides his strongest agents in plain sight. But you might look like the black sheep, the addict, the rebel, the misfit. But behind that disguise is coded light that most people can't even see.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
And let's be clear, the mission is not easy. It's brutal. Because to walk into the shadows with your eyes open, you must first face your own. God doesn't send shadow agents who haven't wrestled their own demons. That's why your life has been so hard. That's why you've been through cycles of pain that made no logical sense. Because the training wasn't happening in a monastery. It was happening in your childhood trauma, in your silent nights of suicidal thoughts, in your years of confusion, self-doubt, and rage. Every ounce of suffering was pressure that sculpted you into a vessel that could carry fire without burning others. Still think you're cursed. Still think God forgot you. What if I told you that your rejection was divine protection? That your loneliness was divine insulation? That your silence was divine initiation? You weren't abandoned. You were being refined. Because one day he knew he would send you into a room full of liars and expect your energy alone to expose the truth. He would send you into institutions built on illusion and expect that your very presence would shake the foundations. That's why you had to be unshakable. That's why you couldn't be codependent. That's why you had to learn how to walk through fire without screaming. Because you were never meant to run from darkness. You were meant to command it. And now comes the part they never tell you. When you finally remember who you are, there's no parade. There's no reward. There's just a knowing, a terrifying clarity. You look around and realize that most of the world is asleep not because they're weak, but because they haven't been activated. And you've been awake for a long time, pretending not to be. You've been dimming your light, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because God doesn't send his shadow agents to be seen. He sends them to see, and to observe, to read the room, and when the time is right, to strike not with violence, but with truth so pure it shatters illusions like glass. You ever wonder why you've always felt like you were preparing for something, even when nothing was happening? That quiet, gnawing sense that you're waiting for a signal? That's not paranoia. That's placement. You're being positioned. God doesn't waste his agents. He places them exactly where the code needs to be injected. And sometimes that means you'll live a life that makes no sense to others. You'll walk away from careers, relationships, religions because you're following a frequency, not a formula. You're responding to something deeper than logic. That's the mark of a true shadow agent. You don't follow maps. You follow orders. And those orders don't come from society. They come from source. But here's the hardest truth. When you finally step into your role, when you finally accept your mission, you will be alone. Not forever, but at first, because the world won't recognize you. Your old tribe will feel foreign. Your old dreams will feel hollow. You'll walk through a season of spiritual isolation, where even the divine feels distant. But that, too, is part of the mission. Because only in that void do you become sovereign. Only in that silence do you stop needing validation. That's when you become dangerous. That's when you become undeniable. That's when the real work begins. And so I ask you a question that only a true shadow agent can answer. If the world never clapped for you, never thanked you, never understood you, would you still carry out your mission? Would you still walk into the dark, knowing it could cost you everything, just because God whispered, "Go"? Because that's what separates the elite from the initiated. That's what separates the chosen from the curious. The hidden war, how dark chosen ones fight for light without being seen. When you walk the path of a dark chosen one, you begin to realize something terrifyingly beautiful. The war you're fighting is invisible. Not just to the world, but often even to yourself. You don't wear armor. You don't carry swords. You carry frequency. You carry codes. You carry truth. And truth doesn't scream. It hums. It vibrates beneath the surface of every interaction, every glance, every silence. You don't need a battlefield because the battlefield is within. And still, somehow, you are at war every single day. Not with others, but with illusion, with distortion, with the unconscious agreements humanity has made with fear, shame, guilt, and despair. That's the hidden war, and you were born for it. People think spiritual warriors are dramatic, loud, obvious, but the real ones, the elite ones, move in silence. They walk into rooms and feel the energetic architecture before anyone speaks. They know who's lying without hearing a word. They know who's hurting behind every smile. They see the possession in the eyes of the powerful. They hear the emptiness in the voices of the praised. They see what most can't, and they say nothing, because that's the rule. You don't expose reality by shouting it. You shift it by being the contrast. You're not here to fight people. You're here to break programs. You're not here to win arguments. You're here to disrupt frequencies. And that's why your life has been so confusing. That's why you've been placed in families, workplaces, and communities where you never fit in. Because you weren't sent to blend. You were sent to interrupt patterns of abuse, denial, spiritual laziness, and unacknowledged trauma. But you weren't sent to be liked. You were sent to be felt. And that feeling, it either heals people or terrifies them. Sometimes both. You've probably noticed it already. People project onto you. They misunderstand you. They're drawn to you but also threatened by you. They either open their soul in your presence or suddenly turn cold. That's not random. That's resonance. Your energy is a mirror, and most people have never seen themselves clearly. When they do, when your field reflects back their lies, their masks, their pain, they either run or awaken. And your job is not to control their response. Your job is to hold the mirror steady, even if your hands are shaking. Because here's what no one tells you about the hidden war. It's exhausting. It's lonely. You'll go through entire seasons where it feels like no one sees what you're doing. Like your work is invisible. Like your presence doesn't matter. But that's the illusion. Because some of the most powerful shifts you'll ever initiate will happen without a single word. Someone will change their life because of one conversation with you. Someone will leave a toxic relationship just because of how they felt when they were around you. Someone will remember their divinity because you embodied yours, even when no one was watching. That's the hidden war. You don't win it with grand gestures. You win it by staying true. And the enemy, it's not evil in the way you think. It's not a villain in the shadows. It's the numbness, the apathy, the distraction, the addiction to comfort, the refusal to feel, and the fear of truth. That's what you're fighting. Every time you choose to be real in a world of filters, you're striking a blow to the matrix. Every time you choose solitude over fake connection, you're disrupting the field. Every time you choose integrity over popularity, you're dismantling illusion. But here's the hardest part. No one claps for you. No one congratulates you. Because they don't see the war. They only see what they're ready to see. That's why you must learn to affirm yourself in silence. You must learn to sit in your power without needing validation. Because if you wait for the world to understand, you'll betray your mission. And the moment you betray your mission, you start to die inside. Slowly, quietly, spiritually. But if you stay aligned, if you keep choosing truth over comfort, presence over pretense, and soul over ego, you become invincible. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. So let me ask you something only you can answer. Are you willing to fight a war you'll never be thanked for? Are you willing to walk into a room knowing you'll be misunderstood, rejected, or even hated, not because you failed, but because your energy is too clean for their illusions? That's the cost of carrying the code. That's the burden of being chosen in the dark. But there's a reward too, a sacred one. When you fight the hidden war with integrity, you start to notice the subtle shifts. The way people soften around you. The way synchronicities speed up. The way truth finds you in unexpected places. But you become a magnet for grace. Not the soft, sweet grace of comfort, but the fierce grace of alignment. The kind that rearranges lives. The kind that collapses timelines. The kind that only the elite shadow agents of God get to taste. You see, the hidden war isn't about destroying evil. It's about revealing light in the places that forgot it existed. And that light, it doesn't come from outside. It comes from you. You don't carry it. You are it, masked, shadowed, refined through fire, but light nonetheless. And so we keep going, not because it's easy, but because there is no other way. The divine double life, why dark chosen ones must wear disguises to fulfill their mission. There's a reason you've always felt like you're living two lives. One that the world sees structured, logical, maybe even successful, and another that no one sees. A hidden realm of knowing, of feeling, of moving through reality with a kind of coded intuition you can't explain. That's not a coincidence. That's not a psychological glitch. That's design. Because when God sends you into the world as a dark chosen one, He doesn't send you with a label. He sends you with a disguise. And the disguise is necessary, not to deceive others but to protect the mission. You see, the mission of a dark chosen one is not to be worshipped. It's not to be followed, it's to activate. But activation doesn't happen when you're standing on a pedestal. It happens when you're standing next to someone and they feel something shift inside them without knowing why. That's why we wear ordinary lives like armor. That's why we learn to speak in normal tones, hide our knowing behind smiles, and nod at things we inwardly dismantle. Because if people saw the full truth of what we carry too soon, it would fry their nervous systems. It would trigger their deepest fears. It would short-circuit their matrix. And God knows this. That's why He doesn't just send power. He sends precision. So yes, you may be a teacher, an artist, a parent, a coder, a barrister, a nurse. Your role doesn't matter. What matters is the frequency you carry inside that role. And the disguise? It's not for your ego. It's for timing. Because being chosen doesn't mean being loud. It means being strategic. It means knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, but when to blend in and when to disrupt, when to walk away and when to make your presence unforgettable. You don't just live, you operate. And the more you accept this, the more power you access, not outward power, but inner calibration. The kind that changes rooms, realities, and people without needing recognition. But here's where it gets hard. The disguise can become a trap. But if you're not careful, you'll start to believe it. You'll start to think the mask is your identity, that your job defines your worth, that your relationships reflect your soul, that your outer life is all there is. And that's when you start to forget. Forget why you came, forget what you carry, forget what you were sent to do. That's the real danger, not failure, not rejection, amnesia. And the only way to stay awake inside the disguise is through ruthless self-honesty. You have to remember every single day that you are not what you seem. You are what you emit, what you transmit, but what you anchor. And yes, it's lonely, because when you live a double life, almost no one sees all of you. Some see your light but not your shadow. Others see your human but not your divine. Few, if any, see the whole. And that's part of the training. God teaches his shadow agents how to walk unseen, how to move with grace inside systems that would crumble if they knew what you really are. You learn to sit at tables you were sent to dismantle. You learn to love people who subconsciously fear your truth. And you learn to speak in code, not because you're hiding, but because you're waiting. Waiting for the moment the disguise can drop. Waiting for the assignment to activate. Waiting for the signal that says, now, show them who you are. And when that moment comes, everything changes. But the disguise becomes a doorway. The mask becomes a mirror. And the people around you suddenly feel something ancient, something electric, something divine, and they won't be able to name it, but they'll never forget it. That's the mark of a true dark chosen one. Your impact is quiet but irreversible. You don't need to be known, you need to be felt. So I ask you this, and I ask it with reverence. Have you mistaken your disguise for your destiny? Or have you remembered that even in your most ordinary moments, you are an agent of something extraordinary? Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more frequency. And that's exactly what you bring. The return, what happens when a dark chosen one completes their mission and awakens the grid? There comes a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when the mission begins to complete itself. Not in a blaze of glory, not with applause or recognition, but with a subtle shift in frequency. You feel it before you can explain it. The intensity begins to soften. The weight you've carried for years becomes lighter, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You've done what you came to do. You've activated the codes. You've disrupted the patterns. You've anchored truth where it was forgotten. And now, something deep within you whispers, it's time to return. But the return isn't about going back to who you were. That version of you no longer exists. What returns is not the you the world knew, it's the essence that was buried beneath lifetimes of roles, masks, and missions. You return to the place inside yourself that was never touched by trauma, never distorted by illusion, never distracted by the noise. And from that place, you begin to truly live. You realize that the mission was never about fixing the world. It was about remembering the world's original design. It was about restoring harmony to the invisible grid that connects everything. And that grid, the energetic architecture of all existence, responds not to effort, but to alignment. And when a dark chosen one completes their mission, they don't just shift their own life. They send ripples through the entire field. People you've never met feel lighter. Systems begin to crack. New ideas are born. Old structures collapse. You don't need to be known by name. The grid knows you by frequency. And now, something unexpected happens. The chaos that once surrounded you starts to dissipate. The relationships that drained you fall away with grace. But the confusion you once battled becomes clarity. You begin to attract, not from desire, but from resonance. You don't chase opportunities, they arrive. You don't seek love, it recognizes you. You don't hustle for purpose, you embody it. And what once felt like an uphill battle now becomes a flow. Not because the world is easier, but because you become undeniable. There is no longer a gap between who you are and who you came to be. But here's the most sacred truth: the return isn't for you. It's for the next wave. Because the moment you complete your mission, you become a beacon, a lighthouse. You don't need to preach or teach, you simply exist, and others begin to remember because of your being. That's how the grid awakens, not through force, but through embodiment. One awakened being standing in truth does more for the collective than 1,000 voices screaming from unhealed wounds. Still, the return is not without its own challenge. You'll be tempted to retreat, to rest forever in your inner peace. But your presence is now a frequency technology. You carry codes that can unlock others. And every space you walk into is affected by your calibration. That's why true dark chosen ones don't retire, they radiate, quietly, powerfully, without attachment, without agenda, just presence, just truth. Just God disguised as a human, remembering itself through every breath. And so, you integrate, you laugh more, you cry without shame, you create not for validation, but as an expression of your soul. Life becomes art again, sacred again. You become both the storm and the stillness, both the question and the answer, both the shadow and the light. There is no more separation, no more proving, no more hiding. Just you, fully returned to yourself, fully awaken the grid, fully aligned with the source that sent you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll meet another, a stranger who feels strangely familiar, a conversation that happens in glances, a moment where two timelines recognize each other. You won't need to explain. You'll just know another one has returned. Another agent has completed the mission. And silently, without words, the grid pulses stronger. The earth breathes deeper, and the divine smiles through you both. So let me ask you, with every ounce of reverence, now that you've remembered, now that you've returned, what will you create next? Not from fear, not from ambition, but from the truth of who you now are. Because the mission is complete, but the story is just beginning.